Hello and welcome, my name's Ryan, I'm also known as RM2K Dev. Now in the last video we successfully had our first packet sent from the server to our client, processed and received, and moved us into our login window. However, our login window is blank. There's absolutely no way to enter text into our game, there's no buttons to click on, we can't log in. So the first thing we need to do before we actually do any more network programming is create a very basic user interface framework. So I have a user interface framework that I had previously built called, I can't remember what it's called, RM2K Dev's UI framework. I don't know what it's called. It's on the Game Maker Marketplace anyway. It was fairly advanced when it came out. However, it doesn't have a lot of other things and people sort of complained about that. But it did have really good text boxes, really good button support, and it's very much like Microsoft.NET where you just drag them onto the screen and click on them. So I'm going to be creating a very simple cut down version of that with focusable elements and hover over text and placeholder text and clickable events and all sorts of cool stuff like that. So to begin with, we're going to create a new group. I'm going to call this UI Framework. Inside of our UI framework, I'm going to create an object, and we're going to call this UI underscore base. I'm going to create another object called UI underscore focus underscore base. And create another object called UI underscore text box underscore base. I'm going to create another object called UI button underscore base. There we go. So we've got our base for our UI framework, we have our base for our focusable elements like text boxes, we have our text box, and we have our button. Now we need to create a sprite group, so I'm going to create a group. I'm going to call this UI framework, and like I mentioned, this is just going to be an extremely simple UI framework. There's no hardcore features here at all, it's just going to be real basic. I'm going to add a sprite called UI base. I'm going to edit that sprite, edit the sprite. It's a new sprite, 32 by 32 pixels. Let me just confirm that. Sorry, it should be 16 by 16. So I'm going to delete that, make a new one that was 16 by 16 pixels. And I'm going to fill it with a nice gray color, because that's the color I'm going to use for my UI. Gray. Yeah, so we create that, and that's done. Now I'm going to give that to, how did I do this before? I'm just trying to remember. That's really weird. I'm just looking at my example project and some things don't match up. So I'm going to give this to all of these UI components, UI focus base, UI text box base, and button base. And the first thing we're going to create is our text boxes. So we need to parent our text boxes to our focusable base, so UI focus base. We need to parent our focus base to the UI base. So basically text box is of type focus and of type focus is of type base. Now our buttons don't need to be focusable, so we can just parent these to base. However, in the end, a text box and a button will always be related to a user interface component, which is UI base. So we don't need to add any code or any parent or anything to our UI base. It's merely there so that we can access all of our object properties. So let's work on our text boxes. So actually the first thing we'll do is we'll just go to room login, and I'm going to create some objects. Actually, I've got to create the objects first, don't I? I'll create a new group called room specific. So these are objects that are going to be specific to a certain room. Create a new group inside of here called login. So this is for our login window. We're going to create two text boxes. So we're going to have txt underscore username. Its parent is going to be UI framework text box base, and it will have the sprite, the same sprite. And press OK on that. And create a new object called txt underscore password. It's going to be parented to a UI focusable element, UI focus base. Same sprite. Press OK on that. I'm going to create two buttons, one for login and one for register. btn underscore login. It's going to be parented to UI framework button base. I need to set the sprite on that as well. And I'm going to create one more called btn underscore register. FYI, btn stands for button, txt stands for text. And I'm going to parent this to the button base object. And I need to give that the sprite as well. The right sprite. There we go. So back in our room login, we can start placing these objects onto the screen. So I'm going to go to my text username. I'll set my snap to 16 by 16 so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm just going to drag this out as wide as I want the button to be. Let me just have a look at my existing project. Yeah, so they're 32 tall, and I think I don't know exactly how wide they are, but they're a bit smaller. Starts under the V and ends under the A. There we go. So they are this big. There we go. So it's that big. So that was my text username. We need to create one called text password. We'll make it the exact same size. Now we need button login, which is just going to be half of this. And we need button register to be about the same size, or the actual same size. So if I put that there and I pull this one just slightly to the left, we're going to get a very nice OCD central UI. That will do it for the view of our room. Now we can go into our txt username object, and in our create event, we are going to add a code segment, which just says event inherited. So our parent object will fire its create event, which is going to be the UI base for focusable elements. And I'm just going to say placeholder equals username, because we're going to use placeholder text in this UI framework. And I'm going to copy that and select OK. I'm going to go to our password. I'm going to add another create event, drag a code segment, and do the same thing. However, this time I'm just going to say password for password text. Now we're going to go into our UI framework and start working on how the text box works. So I'm just going to go to UI framework, UI focus base, because we're going to work on our text boxes. And in our create event, we are going to say event inherited. So basically our focusable elements will now call the UI base object, which it will call its create event. And we're just going to say text equals nothing. So we have a variable on the scope for this object called text. Now we need to add a draw event. So I'm going to add a draw event, standard draw. And we're going to drag a code segment into the draw event. So the first thing we need to do is draw self, so that our element draws itself to the screen. Then what we can do is we can say if focused. Oh crap, I did this in the wrong place. This was supposed to be inside of text box base. I'm sorry. Let me do that again. I'm just going to copy this create event into text box base. Create event for text box base is going to have this, and then the draw event for text box base is going to have the code that we just did. There we go. Sorry, that was all supposed to happen in text box base. So draw self, then we say if focused, and we'll deal with focusing inside of the focus base element. So if it is focused, we'll draw a rectangle starting at its X and Y position, going for its X plus 16, because it's 16 pixels wide, times by image X scale. So whatever its scaling is, and then we'll do the same for Y. So it's going to be Y plus 16 times by image Y scale, which in this case I think it's 2. And we'll just put 2 pixel outline. So if the element is focused, we'll draw a rectangle around it. And for now, we'll leave our UI text box base at that, and we'll go to our UI focus base. So let me just pull up my example, UI focus base. Here we go. So in our create event for our UI focus base, we need to say event inherited and focused equals false. So all of our focusable elements, they start off unfocused. Now in our left pressed event, so if we've clicked on it, we'll get rid of this draw event because that was wrong. So if our mouse left button was pressed, Is that pressed or released? So that's released. If our left button was released, we will add a code segment. We'll inherit this event from our parent object in case we add something above it in the UI base. And we'll say focused equals true. Now when we click any button on the screen at all, so in mouse, global left mouse pressed, so as soon as we click the button, doesn't matter where we click it, when we press it, we want to set all of the existing UI focusable objects to not focused, so that only the current one will be focused when we release our mouse button. So again, we're just going to inherit the event since we're dealing with inheritance. We always want the parent object to be executing its own event, and usually first. Then we'll say with UI focus base. So with any element that was parented to the UI focus base, so in our case, that will all be text boxes. They could be other things though, like checkboxes and radio buttons and all those sort of things if you ever decided to improve the UI framework. Then I'll say focused equals false. So when we click the left mouse button, everything gets unfocused, and when we release it, if we released it on this object, everything would be that object would be focused. And in the case of our text box, if it was focused, it will draw a rectangle around itself. So let's just run our project and have a quick look and see if that works. So if I click on the username, we get a rectangle around that. If I click off the screen somewhere, it goes away. So we're no longer focused. If I click on the password, we get a rectangle. We don't get a rectangle around that. Let's figure out why that is. I'll pause the video, I'll come back and let you know what was wrong. Okay, again, that was just a small inheritance problem. So text username is parented to UI textbox base. I accidentally parented textbox password to UI focus base. That needs to be parented to the textbox base because the textbox base is already parented to the focus base. So if I run that again, we'll just have a quick look and that should be corrected. So if I click on the username, you'll see that we get it highlighted. If I click away, it goes away. If I click on password, the password focuses. If I click away, it goes away. So now we can select between the two text boxes to allow our input to go in. So back in text box base, we need to add a new event. So I'm going to open UI text box base. And the event, sorry, that's button base, text box base. The event that we need to add is a key press for any key. Key press any key. We'll add a code segment into that event. I'm going to say if focused. So because the text box is parented to a focus base, it already knows about that focused variable. So if this object was focused, then we can start appending text to the object. So I'm going to say if keyboard key equals VK backspace. So if we press the backspace, we need to do some magic to take the last character off our string. Otherwise, we will say text plus equals keyboard last char, or char, keyboard last char. So we're going to append the last character pressed on our keyboard into the text variable. And if backspace was pressed, we'll say text equals string copy. So we're going to copy the text itself starting at the beginning of the text, and we're going to go for the entire length, string length of text -1 because we're taking away one character. Now in our draw event, we can add the next part, which is going to render the text to the screen. So I'm going to say below this if focus draw rectangle, if string underscore length of text is greater than 0, or the element was focused, then we're going to draw the actual text to the screen, even if it's empty, because when we focus on it, we want it to be empty. We don't want the placeholder text to be there at all. So we're going to say draw text. I'm going to draw this at x plus 3 and y plus 8. These are just some values that I found to work quite nice. And I'm going to draw the string value of text to the screen. Did I add a correct number of parentheses there? Yeah, I did. Otherwise, if the string wasn't greater than 0 and the component wasn't focused, then we'll draw the placeholder text on the screen. So I'm going to say at the same positions, x plus 3, y plus 8. They just worked well for me. You guys can find what works well for you. I'm going to draw a string placeholder, and that is the string of text that I set up in the actual text box itself in the create event of, say, text username, placeholder equals username. So if we give that a run, and hopefully if everything was correct, we should see two text boxes on the screen with some placeholder text. When you click them, the placeholder text disappears, and when you unfocus from them, the placeholder text comes back. However, if you click them and enter some text in and then unfocus, the placeholder text does not come back and the text that you entered remains. So that's the basis of our text boxes. Let's get started on our buttons. So now that our text boxes are completed, we can begin work on our buttons. I'm going to go into BTN login. Excuse me. I'm going to add a create event to this, and I'm going to add a code segment. Event inherited is always the first thing we do when we're dealing with inherited components, or parented components as GameMaker calls them. And I'm just going to say text equals login. I will also add a left released event, so mouse left released, and we'll add a code segment to that. And this is going to be what we use, what we do with the button when we've clicked on it. So I'm going to do the same thing for login, add a create event, bring in a code segment, event inherited. I'm going to say text equals register. I'll also add a mouse left released and a code segment in there for that. So now we need to jump back into our UI button base this time. Okay, so in UI button base this time, we need to add a create event and drag a code segment into that. I'm going to define that text is equal to nothing and hover equals false. We're going to have a hover for this button so you can actually tell that it's a button. Then I'm going to add a mouse enter and a mouse leave event. Now in the mouse enter event, I'm going to say hover equals true. And in the mouse leave event, I'm going to say hover equals false. And finally, in our draw event, I'm going to add a draw event now. Add a code segment to that. I will say if hover, then do this, else just draw self. And then if after that, I'm going to say draw text, and we're going to draw the text at x plus 3, y plus 8. Again, just values that I found worked nice for me. And I'm going to draw the string value of text. There we go. However, if we were hovering over this button, I'm going to draw a sprite. I'll use sprite X for this. Sprite index. So we're going to draw the same sprite that we currently have. Image index, same animation position, same X, same Y, same image X scale, standard image Y scale, same angle, image angle. However, we're going to use C gray for the color, and the alpha will be 1.0 or just 1. I'll just use 1.0. So yeah, C gray. So if we hover over the image, it's going to go gray or darker than the gray I've got. Otherwise, it'll draw this nice light gray. So now we have a very, very basic UI framework with text and buttons that can be clicked on that hover when you move over them. Text boxes with placeholder text. It's fairly basic, but it gets the job done in this instance here. Now the UI framework is completed. The final thing I will do just to show you that it's working is in our login button, I will add a show message event saying username, if I could spell that correctly, and the username is going to be plus, and this is where it gets quite interesting and very .NET style. I'm going to use I'm just going to say txt underscore username dot text as if replicated from Microsoft.NET. Space, I'll just say password, and I'll just say txt, plus txt underscore password dot text. Now if I give that a run, just to show you guys that it's working. If I click on the username, the login button, we should see the values of username and password appear in a standard hover. And I think that is a good spot to end this video. In the next video, we'll be dealing with the login. We will probably actually, on the server side of things, start dealing with data modeling for the user object, and then registrations, because we need to be able to register before we can log in. So once again, thank you guys for watching. Please like the video. Please share the video on Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, all those, maybe not MySpace, all those old places and new places and good places to share things. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.